Welcome to Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective podcast, where we meet experts from all walks of life to learn their intrinsic motivation so that they can share it with the world. What do we have in store today? Stay tuned to find out more. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody out there in podcast land. You are in tune to another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. This is Hamza, and salutations out to David. Couldn't make it today. He is missing out on a treat, and I actually feel a little selfish for interviewing this guy today because I love traveling the world, but this guy has me out in spades. I mean, he has a book, Youthful Art, Midlife Travel Adventures, the website. We're going to talk a lot about traveling and traveling adventures and meeting fun folks like that. And also on his site, he has 23 tips to stay safe when you travel. So that is of utmost importance of people that are traveling to locations that they're very unfamiliar with. Without further ado, I'd like to get right into it. I'd like to welcome Chris Herrmann to the podcast. Welcome, Chris.
Hello, Hamza. Yes, good to be with you.
Yes, I'm glad you could make it, calling all the way from Australia. And that is one place that I have not made it yet, so I can't wait to make it out there, and maybe we'll share a pint.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. Look, it's just down under. It's not that far, really.
Yes. Well, the world is so small, and for people that have not traveled outside the U.S., you know, once you get that bug, it seems like you cannot stop because you do realize how small the world is, and there's so much to learn. And once you get out of that bubble, I don't think you'll really get back in. Would you agree?
No, exactly. It's one of those things we get absorbed in our sort of lives and what's going around us, but we step out of that, and you know, it's just fascinating just to experience different places. I mean, it's not only just the beauty of the what the world has to offer in terms of just the whole what nature has to offer, but to me the biggest thing is meeting different people. And I mean, one thing that sort of stands out, no matter how diverse the culture, is that we're basically all the same. Have the same sort of needs and different personalities, and that's the fascinating part about traveling.
Yes, it's so funny because, you know, for some of us I was once one of those people, and, you know, living in a small town, and you may be the odd person out in some cases, and once you get to the big city, you're like, oh, wow, there's more people like me. But then when you bring that to the next level and you go to different countries, it's really funny how we kind of congregate through no fault of our own. It seems like there's this universal tithings or tetherings that tether us all together. And you're like, wow, I'm so surprised I met you. Like, it doesn't really surprise me anymore. I expected it.
Yeah, we all tend to be fairly tribal, I guess, by nature. But once we step out and meet other people, that's just the enriching part about traveling.
Yeah. And were you always a traveler, or I mean, your book is Youthful Art, Midlife Travel. So did you always travel, or you got the bug late in life?
I did some traveling. It's different to the younger generation. Like here in Australia, a lot of countries, they call it people taking a gap year, and it's where between university or after college, people then take off and typically travel overseas for normally a year. When I was at that stage in life, didn't have that same opportunity to travel overseas, but did travel interstate, and it's only really perhaps a bit later in life when ventured out to overseas. But since then, have done quite a bit of travelling. Lived overseas with my family, 3 children in places like Saudi Arabia, which was interesting because it was such a different culture. That was a fascinating part about it. Lived in North America for a few years, so had that background of those overseas opportunities. But then this particular travel that I did, which is part of the where the book came from, it was first time I'd actually travelled for that length of time and solo. So that was a whole new experience.
Now that's huge in itself, because if most people had to go solo, they wouldn't go at all. So how did you overcome that hump? Or I'm sure people were in your ear like, are you crazy? Why would you go by yourself?
Well, certainly I was asking myself whether I was crazy, and I guess the background to where this came from. My wife of 40 years, after a week of becoming ill, suddenly passed away. So it was a major, I guess, upset in my life. And I guess as a result of that, it's sort of the realization from her suddenly passing away that you can't take life for granted, because these things always happen to other people. And I suddenly found, well, this doesn't just happen to other people; it can happen to yourself. And it's just a realization that that life is really a gift that can be taken away just as quickly. And I felt the growing need from that I needed to embrace life, and as a result of that, and also the need to really challenge myself as to where this next stage of my life was going. And I used to joke about these young people always heading off in what we call these gap years, just disappearing overseas for 12 months. And I used to sort of joke, they should be more responsible and go get a job like the rest of us had to. But then I was starting to think, well maybe it's not such a bad idea after all. And just for the point of view of actually being challenging, stepping outside the comfort zone. And so that was really the basis behind where that led me to take on this adventure.
And sorry for your loss, definitely.
Well, thank you. Yeah. So it says, but going back to I guess the original question is that while I had this crazy idea to go backpacking around the world, and like I said, it's the first time I'd ever really travelled solo, and I was going to countries that people don't normally go to, and a lot of people saying were dangerous. And so as a result of that, all these fears were kicking in, like going for 12 months on what you're going on your own, that voice inside in your head that sort of, that's always there to try and protect us and keep us safe in our comfort zone. I kept on going with, dealing with all those fears, and are you too old for this, and it's dangerous, and that was the challenge, that against that following the heart versus all these fears that were kicking in. And in the end, it was just really, it sort of came back to, the fact that realization that my wife suddenly passed away, and just thought in the end, let's just do this because life is a gift, and I just feel that strong urge. I just need to get out there and embrace life. So that's what led to doing this crazy idea of describe a grandfather backpacking around the year solo.
No, I love it. I'm thinking before we get into it is when you said can't take life for granted. In many cases, with other people that I've spoken with, throughout time or what have you, they had certain opportunities like to travel or, fill in the blank, and they felt, well, now's not the time, or I'll do it when I retire. And then, like you said, one of these huge disruption happens, and then it's like, now I need to, I can't let these gift horses go away anymore, because they're always around us if we pay attention to it.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that's the biggest trap, is that we put it off, for the ideal time. And that was a strong urge for me. Is once again is because when something like this happens to other people, and it happened to me, and there was that one side of me saying, "Oh, we'll just leave for a few years, wait till things settle down, and all my affairs are all sort of all in place, and perhaps near proper retirement, then I'll do it." But it was just that urge. Now I need to act now, and so yeah, I don't have any regrets about doing that.
Absolutely. And you keep, I don't think you mean to be doing this, but as I interpret it, you were saying like I don't want to say whippersnappers, but the young folks, right? They do that gap year. And then you were saying grandpa. And it made me think of this one gentleman I met in Miami. I was at the Winter Music Conference. It's a big conference. People fly in from all over the world once a year, and it's a big music festival. And anyway, there was this guy there, and he was an older guy. And for whatever reason, we started talking, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm here with my niece and nephew because no one my age does any of the things that I do." So I wanted to know, do you stake to yourself, or you find yourself sometimes migrating to those people during that gap year?
Well, I mean, it is interesting. I think as we sort of grey up top, get older, we get more slotted into a comfortable way of life, and our fears sort of also grow as well. Because that's the one thing that I came back, from my year, is that obviously I was travelling with a lot of younger people, and I mean, they're out there being adventurous, and they're sort of experiencing different cultures, and I'm thinking, well, they're out there having all this fun. Our generation's missing out. I mean, we didn't have the same opportunity then, but we've got it now, and and I think that's our biggest, our biggest dilemma is that our fears kick in, and that, I think that's our challenge, is to step outside of our comfort zone, and that's why the title of the book, is the Youthful. That's our challenge, to bring that youthfulness back into our lives.
Absolutely. And the other thing I want to think about, or I want to talk to you about, is in America, which is kind of sad, but some of us get 2 weeks vacation. Some people get 4, 5, and 6 weeks vacation, but they feel guilty, so they never take it. And so when we think of traveling or vacation, it may be 2 weeks at a time. And so it's a totally different muscle between comparing 2 weeks versus 12 months. Now, was that a huge jump, or did you build up the 12-month excursion?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I don't consider myself a high risk taker, but I look for what I strive for is the experience. And when I went backpacking around the world, it was a progressive thing. Like before I took that trip, there was I saw a flight come up, and it's a $200 flight, or US dollars would have been about $150 for a flight to Singapore return. And I thought, well, I'm going on my own now, and I just discarded it. But then I came back and thought, no, it's almost like a gift. You can't, it's a bit like, it's what about a 4 or 5 hour flight or something. So I thought, no, I'll do it. And that was a bit of a stepping stone, because I just took a backpack, and I backpacked around Malaysia and Thailand. And it's just for 2 weeks, and that was a stepping stone to give me the confidence to say, yeah, this is, I can do this. So it was, if I hadn't done that, well, then I don't think the idea of the gap year, heading off for a whole year, would have been as plausible in my mind.
Yeah, I love it.
And I suppose, like you say, with a lot of vacation time in the US, and I think there's an example with 1 week, 2 weeks, is just to use that just to be a bit more adventurous, because I always had that principle when I was traveling. If it felt uncomfortable, then I felt the need I had to do it, and because it was just like I said, it was stepping outside the comfort zone, and it wasn't for doing risky things. It was just the fact that it felt uncomfortable to me, and I think that's the opportunity where people have, say, just a week or 2 weeks vacation just to do that, and when the time comes, say in retirement, there's more time. Well, then you're sort of really prepped up to be able to even take it further.
And I want to ask you about risk tolerance in itself, because one thing, it was a problem for me initially. I was an ugly American after like 7 days. And what I mean by that is no matter where I went, if it was Germany or France or Italy, I looked for the, quote unquote American experience, not the American experience, but the American stores, like the McDonald's or the Starbucks. So how do you look for a totally new experience, or do you slowly edge yourself into what the culture is doing immediately?
No, I actually try to avoid any sort of Western type place, avoid them like the plague. And I get what you mean, because it is comfort, but once again it's experiencing that different culture. So going to to restaurants where there's local food served. To me, that's all part of the experience. The only thing I must admit, I still find it hard to handle is, like, for example, Asian breakfast. And but all the other meals, the lunch and the dinners, I sort of love exploring those different cuisines.
I like that.
So, but I get what you mean. It is that comfort sort of backdrop, but I just think there's it's just that all part of that whole experience.
Right, and I think that's where I'm going with the next question, because you're saying 12 months at a time, and if a typical American goes for like 2 weeks, they're looking for, as you said, the Western amenities as well, Western accommodations. And so are you doing, you're backpacking, but are you staying at hostels? Are you renting homes in around the locals, so you're not seen as a tourist at all?
Yeah, that was the aim, to really live like a local. Like part of my gap year, the first 3 months, like all I booked on this venture was just I booked a round the world ticket over 12 months. I just had 3 stop-offs, and nothing else planned in those 3 or 4 months in between that. It's just take each day as it came. But the first 3 months, I flew in. The flight was into Madrid. And then I got to Madrid, and I thought, okay, well, I had in mind to go to the city of Valencia, but it's only when I got to Madrid that I found myself at the railway station, and I don't speak Spanish. I only knew 2 words, and that was sí and qué. So anyway, I found myself to the railway station, and then once I was on the train going to Valencia, well, then I started booking accommodation, because I thought, well, I know where I'm going now. So it was, so that was perhaps a different part of the rest. And I went there, I didn't know a soul, but then by the end of that 3 months, I had this really good little social group sort of going. So it was, and it always said to me, like, had I listened to my fears and not gone, sure, I would have been comfortable, but I would have missed out on that great opportunity. So it was after that, then I really just went just for the backpack through for the rest of the year.
I love it. Would you also say that traveling through, and I have no reference for Australia, so pardon my ignorance, but I'm thinking with Europe, it's easier to travel, as you mentioned, with the rail system. You can get around from country to country. It's unfathomable here in the States to do something like that. Were you able to move around more easily using the rail system?
Where I went, there wasn't really a lot of access to rail, so it was mainly by buses. So like through Central America, and I just did the top part of South America, Southeast Asia. It was all by bus, and it's a great system, and there's some really, I mean, it ranges from, you know, the most modern buses. You could have sleeping buses, one bus that had like effectively a full bed in there where you could lie down and sleep, to the good old chicken buses, the yellow school bus type buses. But I mean, it's a great system. But to this day, to be honest, I got no idea how it works. But it does. It's like, for example, I can tell you a story. I was up in Costa Rica at a place called Cloud Mountain, and I wanted to get up to the next country, up to Nicaragua. And I was told if you catch the 6 a.m. bus, then when it crosses, and the bus that heads to the other side of the coast, and when it crosses the Trans-American Highway, get off. So I leave at 6 a.m., find this bus at 6 a.m. We're winding about an hour and a half down the mountain, and we get to this, you know, to the crossing where it crosses the Trans-American Highway, and we get off. The bus stops, we get off, there's about 8 of us get off, and the bus takes off, and we think, well now what? And the idea is you wait for another bus that's heading in the direction you want to go. So anyway, eventually the bus comes along, a nice fancy, you know, quite a modern luxury bus. Hop on the bus and off we go again, and then it crosses the border, and then get over the border, and then the bus stops again. And so we get out, and there's 3 of us at this stage, and before the bus takes off, there's this yelling we'd hear yelling from across the road, and as the bus takes off, there's this chicken bus, and they're waving to us to get on there. So we walk across the road. They throw our backpacks on the roof, and they jam us in the back of this bus, and literally crammed with people, and as I say, bums and armpits and paces. And next half an hour later, in this lovely little seaside village of San Juan del Sur in the Pacific in Nicaragua. So it works. I still don't know how it works, but 90% of my travel is by bus, and it's just a great way to get around.
Is that another thing that you would notice if you're talking about backpacking? Would you notice a novice, they're traveling with too much luggage?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I was in Europe recently, and we went away for 3 months just with a backpack no bigger than carry-on luggage size. And you could argue that, okay, it's having to carry a backpack around, it's a bit hard on the back, particularly as you get older. But I mean, if you keep it down to carry-on luggage size, it's quite manageable. But you see some people lugging their trunks or suitcases around up and down steps in railway stations, and it's just makes travelling too ridiculous when you've got to carry large luggage around. Mm-hmm. And it's such a liberating feeling just having a backpack. It's I mean, like I said, my first 3 months was in Spain, but then when I got to my next stop off in Central America, I actually ditched the suitcase and then just travelled with just the backpack, and like I said, it's really just a liberating feeling.
Mm-hmm. And this is a good thing. Go ahead.
I was going to say, like, you really don't need as much as what you think. I mean, I just have the principle of 2 of everything. From 2 pair of trousers with zip-off pants to make shorts, 2 tops, 2 undies, 2 socks, and as the core type items, and you just wash things out each day, and like I said, and then do the sniff test. If everything's going good, then you keep rinsing it out and on for the next day. And then when the sniff test fails, then you need to find a laundromat.
Oh my goodness. Well, I want to, since I'm speaking to an expert, I think you kind of gave the first clue. And here in the States, I think all major airlines, with the exception of 2, charge you for baggage. And so that kind of cuts your traveling in half as far as expense-wise, wouldn't it?
Well, that's right, because a lot of the discount lines, they make up for charging you for baggage. So that's one saving. The the other, just that convenience when you get off the flight, you don't have to worry about it. Waiting, you got your bag with you and just walk straight out the airport. But I mean, the main reason really is just that convenience of travelling from place to place.
Absolutely.
I mean, I will admit, like I was probably a few kilos or a pound or so over the legal weight, but if there's any suspicion of being caught, well, I'd just stuff some of the heavier stuff in my jacket and put my jacket on. So I brought the carry-on bag down to legal weight.
That's what I was going to ask you, because a friend of mine, he just went to Colorado from Atlanta, and he saw he got a thing in an email, and it was like flying for $30. So he's like, I was going to jump on it. And then after I think they charged him for the seat on the plane. They charged him to bring his own chair. They charged him for air on the plane. It was so much nickel and diming. How do you determine what's actually a good fare and where they're really going to just nickel and dime you the whole trip?
Well, I suppose one of those things when you really drill down to it, you discover what all the extras are. But yeah, I mean, on this particular trip, I just booked that one major round the world ticket before I left. I did have a couple side trips, but they were pretty well just pre-booked. Like for around Christmas, I took a week or 2 weeks just off, and this trip went up to the States and had Christmas. Some friends up in New York State and up to Canada just to catch up some friends for New Year. But then I was back into Central America.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you about a typical day. Now, I know some folks, I'm guilty of it from time to time, not always, I'm getting better day by day, where you schedule the whole day versus someone that's like, well, let's see what the day brings. What's your position on planning your day when you're doing this extensive travel?
Well, I'll just step back from that. Like I've had some friends, and I was sitting with them one day, and they went to the extensive detail about how the whole trip was planned day by day, and I thought, wow, that's pretty impressive. Because my whole idea was just to take each day as it came. Like if I liked a place, I stayed. If I didn't, I moved on. Like one place was that I mentioned before, San Juan del Sur in Nicaragua. I only planned there just to pass through there perhaps a couple of days and move on. But I got involved with some people in the community. One was a Rotary Club where they would facilitate school leavers from the US. They would come down for a week, and they would take on a school, and they'd paint it and plumb it, and then that school group would leave, and another one would come down and take on another school. So I got involved in that club, part of that, in their coordination role. So I ended up staying there probably about 3 weeks. But in terms of each day, one of the things that I enjoyed doing, because one of the things about traveling, I guess, that period of time, you can travel for the sake of it, and every mountain starts to look the same as every other mountain, every waterfall looks the same. Mm-hmm. So it's to add a little bit of purpose within that travel, and what I did was I enrolled in Spanish classes. Now, please don't speak to me in Spanish, because it's not my forte, learning languages, and it's been what I did learn I would have forgotten now anyway. But anyway, the point being is that I would enroll. I probably did about 8 weeks of Spanish over 5 different countries, and so it was typically like a half a day per day. And what it did was several things. First of all, it gave a sense of purpose and a sense of satisfaction actually learning about the language. And I was, when I was doing, I was able to start conversing with in the language. So it was that sense of satisfaction of learning something different. So it was stretching stretching the mind a bit. But the other thing too, it was a basis to a social aspect about meeting people. Because I was travelling on my own. Well, it was one opportunity to meet people, and I made some good friends out of the different classes I went. In fact, one good friend that I met through the class in Costa Rica and Panama recently asked us over to stay with him in Switzerland. So that's just one of the nice spin-offs of being able to meet people.
Mm-hmm. Hear, hear. And I will concur that, while sitting in school, learning the language is totally different than actually living there and being immersed, where you had to learn the language to survive night and day.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was when I first enrolled, I never had any intent to learn Spanish, but I thought, well, I'll give it a go. And so I enrolled in this class. It was actually in Spain. And anyway, the first week didn't go well. Because everything was in Spanish, and I couldn't even understand the teacher. And when the teacher asked me a question, well, it sort of, I had this sort of dropped jaw and this glazed look at me, and just got no idea what she was talking about. Anyway, they told me, look, stick with it, it'll get better. Anyway, in the end of the week, they gave me my money back. So the
wow!
Week didn't go. But anyway, I persevered with it, and I did about 8 weeks over 5 different countries, and I sort of enrolled what I call more the kindergarten for adults Spanish classes, and it and for the reasons I mentioned before, it was something I actually enjoyed doing.
Do you surf by any chance, Chris?
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because I don't surf, and my youngest son's a keen surfer, and he'd always been badging me that, come on, Dad, let's come out surfing. But of course, the issue down here is it's all right in summer, but then there's those snappy tom sharks we have down here, which is to me is not feeling quite as adventurous to be meeting up with those. So I never really took it up with him. But when I was in Costa Rica, opportunity came up to take on surfing, or at least have a go at it, and all the conditions were right, because they don't have these sharks over there, and it's really quite a crazy thing to be in the water in the Caribbean. There's nothing there to try and take you out. So I had a go at surfing, and I managed to get a photo of me on a board, but unbeknown to people seeing the photo, that was only about probably 5 seconds, but so yeah, that was another thing about just I guess stepping out the comfort zone, just doing things different that I wouldn't normally do, and that was just really part of the whole experience of the travel.
Yeah, I was going to recommend. I mean, if you're by Nasara and all that by Panama, I mean, it's some pretty decent surfing. It's a good time. And the way
right. Yeah, I think my son, well, he's in the family. Our little kids, I think, would love to have actually come over and join me and taken up some of those little great surfing spots there.
Let me ask you, I'm a tech guy. I like gadgets and all this other stuff. And I was just wondering, are you playing with any of these new translation vehicles where you can use your phone and say, I want ice cream, and they translate it into wherever you were in the world? I didn't know if you were starting to incorporate those.
Oh, man, that was my savior.
Okay.
Like Google Translate. I mean, who came up with that? That's a great thing. Like, I was in this post office and I had to post a letter, and you walk in the door and it's got this little stand there, this little electronic stand, and press this for that, press that for that, and I had no idea what the thing meant. So I got out my Google Translate and pointed the thing at using that picture thing. Oh, I see. So press that, and that's where I had to go. So, and then same when I went to the supermarket, and just to understand what milk is, like it's leche, so it's point the thing at the cart and just to make sure you know what you're buying, and that's basically you can't leave home without it is the way I look at it. And in terms of gadgets, like, people would say to me, were you ever lonely? And I mean, sure, I was traveling alone, but I was never really in the sense of the word lonely. Like, because a lot of times, I would sort of meet people and we'd sort of, hang out together, and some good friends that have still to this day. But other times, as a foundation, like when there was gaps and all that, my social base was my family and close friends. And once again, it was through the smartphone, because every country I went to, first thing I'd do was get a local SIM card. So I always had mobile data access. I know you can get Wi-Fi, but sometimes, Wi-Fi is not there when you want it. And so, I'd get messages from my son, "How you going, Dad? Where are you?" Or, be, video chats with, my children and grandchildren. So it provided that sort of base social connection. And to be honest, I sort of wonder what it'd be like to travel without it. I mean, some people say, it's good to get away, just leave your phone at home. But I think for that length of time, it would be, to me, it was just a central part of traveling. Because the other thing too, in terms of the traveling and connecting with people, like I'd use the smartphone for different apps to connect with people. One is meetup.com. I don't know if you're familiar with that one.
Yeah.
It's quite big in Spain, in fact, because it's used for connecting with, as the name implies, meetup. Some might be organising a dinner or a brunch or a wine tour, or so. In fact, my social life in while I was in Spain was actually busier than what it was in Australia, and I thought I had a busy social life here. And other times, I went to, I was transiting back through Colombia, and I had a spare day, so I went on this, I think that was like Internations, and found a group that was doing a hike for the day. So I joined up with them and had a great day with them, and then some of those still keep in contact with. And so it's just through a lot of those apps. Facebook local groups, that's another way of connecting with people. So there's all these different tools that apps you can use, which provides some great social connections. And there was another one I did a bit of a side trip to Morocco, and I was there, and I through, I think that was another one, through Internations, I found a person, just happened to be Australian lady who's been there for 12 months or something. And I said, well, can you, I'm just here for a couple of days in that particular city, do you reckon you could show us around? So anyway, she took us around, and one of the other people that was staying at the Riad, which is like the guest house where I was staying, they joined, and the group of us went around, had a look around the city, courtesy of this person who lived there, so got local experience, and all from one of the apps using the smartphone. So yeah, the tech stuff is, I think, it's just such a great asset for traveling.
One that you didn't mention was TripAdvisor. Do you use that at all, or you find it to be legitimate?
Yes, I did. I mean, those tools like TripAdvisor, Lonely Planet, and certainly local Google searches as well on sort of highlights of a city. So when I'd get to a city, I would then just do a bit of research, the top things to do or see in the city, and TripAdvisor would be one of those tools that I would use.
Mm-hmm. I have a question about the last question about tools, about Google search. And so did you notice different type of searches depending on the country that you're in? Like, it was amazing to me. In the States, we would get one group of information versus if I were in the UK, I mean, outside of just the local stuff, it just seems like national news is on a whole different scale in different countries. Did you see any similarities with that?
Yeah, Google does tend to sort of localize it. So depending on the region you're in, it will then give you searches in that particular region, which can be a bit annoying too, because they'd change the language, and they'd be presenting the search bar and contents in languages I just couldn't understand. So that didn't help much.
Yeah. Yep. Now, on your site, you also talk about 23 tips to stay safe when you travel. And I know probably in your home country and here in the States, we have that, like you said, that creatures of comfort, and we're used to our familiar surroundings. But when we're in a foreign land, what are some tips that we can use to stay safe?
Yeah, well, just on that safety, like we always fear things, how unsafe they are. Like I was talking to some yesterday in the States and talking about, and this just doesn't apply to America, it's anywhere, and the guy was talking about his mother, that she didn't even want to go interstate, like to state America, because terrorism and all those fears. And like I said, that's not just America. So it's all, I mean, that's obviously extreme case, but we all have these fears, and I have them too, about going to a place and you think, well, is it safe? Yeah, but it's, I think we're our worst enemy in terms of our fears, and I have this saying, it's only dangerous until you get there, because we're sitting in our armchair at home and pondering this, and we're hearing all the news how bad things are in the world. But when you get there, then you find, well, it's really not that bad. I mean, certainly any country, take any city, the city you live, the city I live in, there's places where we don't go. If we go there, we're at higher risk. But in some places, some countries, those places, the no-go zones are bigger than what our cities may be. But there's still some great places to see. Like, for example, I was told to not go further north than Nicaragua, is too dangerous. So anyway, the next country up was Honduras, and I thought, well, there's people going to Honduras and coming back, it can't be too bad. But it wasn't quite that blasé. But what I did is I followed common tourist routes where there's a lot of tourists that were going in these particular places I was going to. And the key thing, I mean, had I sort of succumbed to those fears that people were saying, well, I would have missed out on some great opportunities in Honduras, when diving there, and then further up to Guatemala. Some of the people I sort of met there, just really fantastic experiences. So really going back to your question, I mean, the first tip to me is to seek out local advice. Like I was in Colombia, and I arrived about midday, and I thought, well, I'd been travelling for a few hours, and I wanted to get out, just do a bit of, go for a walk. And they said, and there was a mountain where you can go up for a bit of a lookout. And they said, oh, look, best not to do it now, do it in the morning, it's too hot. And I thought, oh, it's not really that hot. Anyway, they convinced me not to do it, but the reason it was actually safer to do it in the morning, because in the morning, this particular route, walking path up this mountain is lined with police. So and there was, literally hundreds of people either jogging up or walking up. So once again, it was just heeding that local advice. So the first thing I do when I checked into a accommodation, I'd say, well, is this safe to go out, or where's it safe? And even if looked at, oh, no, it's completely safe, well, then I'd have that confidence to venture out. So it's really just being streetwise. And the other thing too is I never ventured out where there wasn't other people around. Like, I mean, I'd go out a lot on my own, like sort of exploring the city, but if sometimes I found myself just ventured out where there's no one else around, like, well, then I'd backtrack just so that there was plenty of people around. So that's just some of the basic tips that I always recommend.
I want to point that you had mentioned someone they were asking you if you were lonely, and I wanted to posit this question to you too, a scenario, and get your take on it. Another friend of mine, she was going to China, and she was bringing a work colleague with them, and before they had gone, the work colleague had like looked at all the web, everything on the web, and when they left, he had like the mask so he didn't get sick, from what is it, bird flu at the time, and he was like super prepared, right? And he was the only one that got sick when he got there. So what's your take on that as far as the mind leading us to our biggest fears if we let it?
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe there's something in it. If we think we're going to get sick, well, then I'm sure we will. I mean, interestingly, for that whole 12 months, and I never got sick once. I mean, the stomach might have been a little bit unsettled, but certainly not as in sick. And some of the places and the food I was eating, I could look at this bowl of stuff and I'd say to my stomach, "Come on, stomach, we can do this." and and some of the places, see where I mean, there's one place I was staying at this Buddhist monastery. It's in Myanmar, and it was a nice meal, a really tasty meal, spicy, and then I looked out over the side, out through the window, and I thought, my God, this is where they prepared it. Like it was not the most sort of wouldn't pass any health test by our standards, but well, it's just maybe I was lucky, but and I think too, and I think you're right. If you think you're going to get ill, well, then you probably will. And I always look at it this way. Look, it's all good for the immune system. The more you sort of challenge it, well, then the stronger it gets. So,
right.
It worked for me.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, I would be offended if somebody keeps coming up to me, "Where's the safe places to go? Can I be safe?" You're like, we lived there our whole lives. It's kind of, like you said, if you just keep your street smarts and your wits about you, you can't go in with a fear-based mind. I mean, how are you even going to enjoy yourself?
Yeah, no, I think it's still wise. I mean, these are say at hostels or guest houses, and they're used to travellers coming there, and I think it's a fair question that they would expect. I mean, it does. I mean, I can see what you mean. It does sound a bit naive, but I think it's a reasonable question to ask, and it's also asking other travellers who've been there for a while, and just to get the lay of the land. But I wouldn't hesitate to ask that dumb question, just to just have that confidence of where. Like when I went to Morocco, I was taken by taxi, and we're winding away through these sort of streets and there's sort of really dark, dingy alleys, and there was sort of, cats and scrounging through garbage cans, and there's people lingering around. It didn't, by our standards, it didn't look a very nice place to be. And the crazy part about this in Marrakesh, you go through these windy little sort of dingy streets, and you got this black door, and you knock on the door, and the manager opens it. The door opens, and it's just like a little oasis, this little, this delightful little guest house inside. And anyway, they told me, "No, look, it's all safe around there." So, like it looked on the surface a bit sort of dodgy, but it was I certainly didn't have a sense of being unsafe. And similar experience when I was in Valencia in Spain. I lived in this middle of this 2,000-year-old city, and it's all these little laneways that sort of meander around. And once again, by our standards, you'd think twice about going there, but there was just that sense you could sort of feel that it was actually safe to go there, and even the women would say they're quite comfortable about walking around at night. So once again, it's just picking up that local knowledge and I guess that sense of intuition as well. But having said that, I mean, no place is safe. Like, it's dangerous wherever you are. It's dangerous at home. You get out of bed in the morning and you're subject to dangers. It's like there was a case where in Nicaragua there was a thing doing around the local Facebook group about someone was threatened by a machete. But interestingly, the same thing back in my home city in Australia, which is, just a normal, quite a safe city. Doing the rounds on Facebook, someone was attacked by a machete there. But the question is, which place is safer? The one that we're not familiar with, or the one that we are familiar with? So there's dangers everywhere.
Absolutely. And so, would I be safe to assume that you're definitely including travel insurance when you travel?
Yes, definitely, and that's certainly a definite. In fact, I travel with what I refer to as free travel insurance, because and it's probably the same in the US, but in Australia you can suspend your health insurance while you're away, health insurance premium, so that sort of really offset the cost of the travel insurance.
That's a good point. Good point. And one other question: you were traveling all over, and you met people. Did some of those people return the favor and come to Australia and seek you out?
There's a list of people that are keen to come down under, and we look forward to having them as well.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I mean, actually, there was a friend that I met. I was just actually doing this cycling, and we just sort of buddied up, and he did come to Australia. We didn't quite work out to meet up, but we caught up with him back in Austria. Had a lovely few days with him and his wife, and once again, it's a great thing about travel is the people you meet and the friends you make from it, and then from that is that further cultural experiences. Like that little time in Austria on that recent trip, just to have that. I mean, we could have travelled through Austria as a tourist and ticked off all the things, but it's when you actually experience it with local people, and and then sort of get the opportunity to meet their friends and just get that whole cultural experience. That's just the magic of travel.
Absolutely. I think my biggest takeaway is that we're never too old to do this. And to overcome our fears is just get out there and enjoy life.
Oh, definitely. And even like never too old. Like I came across, there's this a Japanese American, and he was 82. He was in Guatemala, and he goes down. He leaves his wife behind because she's not so keen on traveling. So off he goes. Goes for a few months, and he was studying Spanish down there, the Spanish school I was doing, and to me, it's just such a great inspiration, and I'd come across friends who'd come across, 80-year-old women that, were similarly, travelling around. So yes, no, you're quite right. Age is no barrier. It's just we're the only ones that are stopping ourselves. It's not all the other factors.
I love it. I love it. And for those that are still not convinced and need even more information, please tell them how they can get your Youthful Art Midlife Travel Adventures and how to learn more information about you, Chris.
Yeah, so it's youthfulmidlifetravel.com. So youthfulmidlifetravel.com. There's the book in there, but even if just to sign up there, if there's a 10 or 5 tips on travel, just download that and put your name down, and because one of the things I'm really looking to do is helping to inspire people and give tips and to be able to take on your own adventures, overcome those fears that are stopping you from doing it, giving you the confidence to be able to do it.
I love it. Well, you have just been in tune to another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. This is Hamza. Salutations to David that couldn't make it today. Chris Herrmann, it was a pleasure. You know what? We'll probably meet somewhere on the earth.
Well, that'd be great. I look forward to it. It's been a pleasure chatting with you today, Hamza.
Likewise. Let's stay in touch.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Cheers. Listen to Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective on Radio Public. It's a free, easy-to-use app that helps listeners like you find and support shows like ours. When you listen to our show on Radio Public, we receive direct financial support every time you hear an episode. Experience our show in Radio Public today by listening to the show link in our episode notes, and thank you for listening.